Get started. So welcome to our first guest speaker panel of the day. My name is Devin Golets from Top Hat to discuss their perspective on sustainable education based on their work experience. Before we get started on the panel, there's just a few logistics to go through quickly. Please make sure you're muted for the duration of the call. We will unmute you as needed through our panel discussion. Please use the Zoom function. Raise your hand if you would like to ask a question. If you are not comfortable with voicing your question publicly, please do not hesitate to send myself or Sharon a message, and we would be more than happy to ask the question anonymously. Should you have any technical difficulties or any other questions about the conference, please do not hesitate to DM myself or Sharon on Zoom or the email info@event@hellocircle.ca, which is found on the website. Our speakers will first introduce themselves and speak briefly about the case, at which point we will begin a question and answer period for the duration of the session. I would like to ask Dennis to first begin his presentation, followed by Devin.
Hi, everyone. So good to meet you all virtually, I guess. So I guess for my segment, I can walk through my story about working at RBC and beforehand, sort of how I was involved in education. Hopefully that spurs some questions. So I think that the first thing to say is that education needs to change with technology due to the fact that we can't be ready for a world without being exposed to the things in it currently. So one story was that I was in university and I worked at RBC for my first internship there. And I realized that I just learned something completely new that I didn't learn in school in my degree in computer science. And that was something called cloud and DevOps. So some of you may know about that if you have a technical background, some may not. Basically, it's a way to automate your code and deploy it in a way that makes it easier to consume. So I went to the head of the computer science faculty and I asked them, could we create a cloud and DevOps course, given that it's such an important field in the industry right now? And the answer was sure, let us ask around with the different professors. So eventually the answer was, oh, this is a good topic, but nobody has time to teach it. So without that kind of exposure, we can't expect students to walk into career fields ready to go because the skills that are important aren't being taught. So I guess going back to the beginning of who I am. So I'm currently a cloud engineer at RBC, so you can get the connection to this story. But before that, I had experiences running a pretty large student group called Tech Under 20, teaching after-school programs in the public speaking, debate, and computer science field. And I had my university degree at U of T in computer science. So in terms of education, I can talk a little bit more about my experiences both teaching and working at RBC. So from the teaching front, I guess my first bout with teaching began at summer camp when I was a counselor starting in grade 9. So the teaching there wasn't sort of education focused in the traditional sense, but it's how do we engage younger people to just be excited about things that they're doing at summer camp, right? So it's going outside, making new friends. There's also an educational aspect there. We did singing at the camp and music as well. So all these different things sort of helped me learn how to facilitate the conversations and make sure that people are having a good time. And I think this is super important in an educational space, is that if people aren't enjoying themselves, then people won't retain the skills that they need to be successful. So while doing that, I was also heavily a part of our school's debate club, and the culture that we had there was focusing in on how do we teach younger students sort of what we've learned through tournaments and in our own experience. So the way that the club was structured was that there was a junior meeting and a senior meeting, and the seniors taught the juniors sort of everything they knew, and that cycle sort of continued. And you got to witness this sort of organic cycle from when I first started in grade 9 going up to grade 12 when I was leading a lot of the sessions. So from that perspective, I think that the same theory applied. How do we present this opinion that of things that we've learned and provide mentorship while making things engaging? So if we fast forward a little later into university, when I was sort of teaching as a part-time job as a debate coach, public speaking coach, and a computer science teacher, it was the same aspect. It was the same idea of experimentation. As compared to sort of school life, where teachers taught the same material every year, every class for me was an experimentation. It was a question of how can we improve the class? How can we try out new games to get students to learn new concepts or get engaged or become more comfortable in the space? So this was something that sort of came from a technology background where you want to innovate and try to iterate on all your solutions. So from an educational perspective, each of my lessons, even if I taught them to I taught the same lesson plan, depending on the group, the age group, and the people in the class, they'd always vary slightly. And that sort of personalization was something that was required in order to get the best out of the students. Playing a game that could turn really rowdy wouldn't necessarily work out with a super rowdy class that was sort of borderline of misbehaving. As compared to a quieter group of students, it was more important to get them to speak up and sort of laugh and sort of be a little bit more, I guess, vocal. So from that perspective, I think personalization is super important in learning. And as a teacher or a facilitator, you should be open to trying new things out. And sometimes there are things that didn't work, like debate topics that were too advanced for the students in the age I was teaching, but that's an adjustment, right? That you have to make is that you have to learn based on who you're teaching. You can't just teach something that's generic. What I've learned, and probably that you've learned, is that people in the same age group or cohort learn differently and know different things. So you can't just create a one-size-fits-all model. So going into RBC, in RBC, sort of my day job has been fairly consistent. It's a technology job. I code. I talk to people about their problems in terms of how to fix it with technology solutions. I build this stuff. So from that perspective, I think teaching comes down to a couple aspects, or the education space rather. One is figuring out what people know and don't know. I think that's the whole discovery process. And you might be talking to somebody on the business side who might be very technical because they just switched to that role a month ago, and their previous role was directly involving the problem you're trying to help them solve. At the same time, people on the technical side might have vast experiences in other fields, but with this field, you need to sort of assess where the strengths are. So I think figuring out where people's strengths lie and sort of hitting that baseline rather than just jumping into problem solving is important. Beyond that, it's teaching and helping people learn. The cloud space is still very quickly developing. So I've done things like creating lunch and learns, doing presentations, writing a lot of documentation, doing R&D to sort of test the limits of what the cloud platforms enable. So as a background, right now, there's sort of three major players in the cloud space. There's Amazon, currently the biggest cloud with their AWS. So that's Amazon Web Services. There's Microsoft with their Azure platform, and Google with GCP, Google Cloud Platform. So with all those players, they have vast amounts of documentation, lots of things to learn about that. But sometimes when you're working in a big company like RBC, you test the limits because you're one of only a few customers who will actually be using something. So as an example, there's something called identity in the cloud and security space. And it's pretty simple. You have some sort of credentials and you're going to be using those to access certain resources and such. With identity, that concept works well maybe with a company of 1,000 people or 10,000 people, but at RBC we have 85,000, right? So the question is, how do you scale and ensure that these things work? So from an implementation side, you get to those edge cases. And I think that's something that's important, is that sometimes the material to learn isn't available online because you're in a unique situation. So you really need to understand the context that you're in. I guess to wrap up, since I'm getting close to time, one of the other things I wanted to mention is that it's important to give back to your community, and that's something that I've been trying to do for a while. So in the beginning of university, I joined a group called Tech Under 20, which helped students focus on the technology, business, and entrepreneurship space. And in the past 5 years, I've been involved in different capacities, whether being on the leadership team to leading the team to now being an advisor. And sort of the whole goal was to mentor and help students who are younger to figure out their career paths and be connected to opportunities. So from an education perspective, that has taken many roles in terms of events that have been created, personal mentorship, connecting people to mentors, creating a system where they can learn. And I think creating an educational system has so many different components. And without considering the different things that you can do in terms of personalized, generic content, written content, spoken content, it's hard to really teach people because the only way to learn is through immersion. And we can't always do full immersion. So instead, we have to do the next best thing. So I encourage everybody to immerse themselves in anything that they're learning, whether it's the conference today or anything else, and enjoy your time learning.
Thank you so much for your presentation. That was amazing. We're now going to allow Devin to begin his presentation.
Awesome. There we go. I was just finding the unmute button there. Boomy, is it possible that would it be beneficial if I shared a couple Google slides or?
Yeah. Let me know if you can't do it. Otherwise.
Okay. Yeah, I'll try to. Can I share my? It says I can't share my screen, but
you should be able to now. Yeah.
There we go. Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. Can you see me? Can you see my screen here?
Yeah, we can see it.
The Google Slides. Okay, awesome. So hi, everyone. My name is Devin Golets. I graduated from Western University in 2015. I studied in the MIT program, so Media, Information, and Technoculture. Bachelor's of Arts. Absolutely loved my time at Western. And in the last 5 years, I've been a higher education professional, consultant, and coach. And I've worked in 4 major different types of roles. And I'm really excited to share that experience with you today. And when I was reading through the information that Boomy and Sharon and the whole Circle team had sent me, I thought I would highlight some of the different challenges that I worked on in each role, because I think it's really important as a student when you're looking at an entire industry and we're trying to solve problems or different job titles. When you're thinking about your career, it's important to think about what actual challenges you want to take on and problems you want to solve. So that's what, hopefully you'll get some ideas from this, and perhaps this will stimulate some ideas and questions. So my very first job when I graduated from Western in 2015 was working in recruitment. So every single university in higher education, it's a very competitive landscape. Everyone has a recruitment team or a liaison team. So you may remember in high school, somebody visiting your school and making a presentation. I was that guy for about 2.5 years. So I traveled across Canada. I made presentations that reached over 10,000 people. And I talked about the benefits of going to Western. And so I would talk about the various academic programs and the student experience. And this was the team that I was on here. Now, this was an amazing job, being able to travel across Canada, making hundreds of presentations and working with high school students as they're figuring out what they want to do. But some of the challenges that the students were thinking, so just thinking about the industry as a whole, a lot of high school students get caught in binary thinking. So you may remember this, like I'm either going to go to Queen's Commerce or Western Ivy, or I'm either going to be successful or I'm going to be a complete failure, or, I'm either going to get into my top school or like I'm just not going to be successful at all. So one of the challenges I think for students is understanding that the world is not black and white, and that there are many different approaches to understanding what your options are. Another challenge was just understanding the entire process and possibilities. So it's really overwhelming in grade 12, grade 11 for students. They feel a lot of pressure. They put a ton of pressure on themselves. There's a lot of information, a lot of homework. So helping them understand and try to simplify in a step-by-step process. Like if you want to get into Western, these are the things that you can do, and it's not as hard as you think. There was a fear of the liberal arts as well. So I noticed that in the information that was shared. 80% of jobs roughly in Canada don't require a specific degree. There is a lot of fear that the liberal arts was not going to pan out, when really it's actually a fantastic education. And then a lot of students don't actually think necessarily about what they want. They look more at the solutions, which is the different options. The challenges for us in recruitment, Western had such a great brand that it was very simple for us to actually, we didn't really have to sell anything. The school sells itself, but it is a competitive landscape. There are a lot of universities that struggle to fill their first year class. So recruitment is huge. It's so important for them. So they are thinking about how best do we connect with the students? What marketing channels? Is it Snapchat? Is it Instagram? Now with COVID, we used to make hundreds of school visits every fall. The Ontario University Fair, some of you may have gone to that. Sorry, there's a plane flying overhead. If that's, I'm not sure if that's, you're picking that up. But you know, what now? What are these recruitment teams doing? How is Western competing to get students into their first year classes? What's Queen's doing? What is Trent doing? What are some of the Northern Ontario schools doing where they're always struggling to get that first year class filled? So it is a competitive landscape. So those are some of the challenges that we worked on at Western. After a couple of years, I decided to fund or start my own education consulting business. So this was called AdmitKit. I started with another guy that I used to work with, and we wanted to work with anybody who is interested in going anywhere in university. So we didn't want to just be working with students only interested in Western. So and I wanted to learn about entrepreneurship and start my own business. So some of the challenges for students were very similar to recruitment, right? They were like trying to understand, make sense of the whole process, really overwhelming. So we were almost kind of like a luxury for some people, where, you know, some people you can compare it to taxes, right? Like you might find that whole process really confusing. So for some people, they just hire an accountant. We were kind of like that person that could help the family. We're going to hire someone to help us manage this really massive decision. Sometimes students, the stonewall, I put that there, trying to connect with students, ask them a lot of questions. A lot of 16-year-olds it's kind of like a stonewall. They're not willing to share too much, which does make it challenging to give someone advice if they don't tell you much about them. Having students be accountable and take action too is also a challenge. Sometimes they just get overwhelmed and put things off. And again, taking on too much pressure. I worked with some really, really high achieving students. I helped consult some students who ended up getting $65,000 scholarships. One student we worked with made it to the final round of the Loren Scholarship, which was one of the most competitive in Canada. And even those high achieving students, it was really interesting to see the trend of mental health, how much pressure they put on themselves in grade 12. They have to get into all the programs and get all the scholarships. And, you know, so that was something really interesting. This is a photo of me at a conference where we were helping out some athletes on the education side. So the challenges, there's a lot of challenges with entrepreneurship. It is very challenging. You're wearing a lot of hats. You have to constantly hypothesize, test, and iterate your ideas. And then, of course, other challenges with entrepreneurship is having team dynamics, making sure you have a proper value proposition. And when you're doing this on the side, also the gig economy, you know, juggling a full-time job with something on the side. How am I doing for time, Boomy? Do I have like 2 more minutes here?
You got as much time as you need.
Okay, I'll just wrap up here. I don't want to talk too long. After working in recruitment and education consulting, the side business was kind of going on both during recruitment and when I was a career counselor. So this is a photo of me at a conference last year that I helped organize for the undergraduate students in the Faculty of Information and Media Studies at Western. So I ran the internship program for FIMS and counseled mainly the 3rd and 4th year students, although anyone in the faculty could come to me to talk about career development. So some of the challenges that the students faced, and again, this would be challenges that you're likely aware of as well if you're still in university, regardless of the faculty that you're in. There is a large unawareness that I picked up and a lack of career development skill. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of students who don't put thoughtful energy into understanding career development. So they're not fully aware of the X's and O's of understanding resumes, cover letters, interview, but they're also not spending a lot of time being introspective and understanding what am I hoping to get out of this degree until that day comes in 4th year in their final semester where they would come see me and say, holy smokes, I'm out of here in 3 months and I haven't been thinking about this. What am I going to do with my degree? So some of the challenges for the students that I picked up were they didn't understand themselves, what they want, why they want it, how they're going to get there. They didn't have a lot of planning involved. A lot of students had imposter syndrome in the liberal arts faculty. Can totally debunk those myths about the value of a liberal arts degree. Whoopsies. The lack of guidance, that was one of the themes that I picked up in the circle sort of speaker notes ahead of time. Absolutely, career planning, a lot of students felt like they didn't have a lot of guidance. Now, if you think about it, you as a student, some of the challenges that you may be facing, or if you've just graduated, what's your narrative and what's your story going on right now with COVID-19? It's very hard to get a summer job to begin with. Now it's even harder. So so your generation now in university have this added challenge where you have to overcome that. The challenges for me, obviously many tasks, juggling priorities. I would say balancing coaching with student accountability. That was really interesting. I wasn't a parent. There is a lot of times where I had to say no to a student or throw it back to them. Like, you need to do more. I can't just get you an internship or get you a job. We need to work together. I'm going to coach you up so that you can get it for yourself. And then also, I think for career counseling in general on campuses, challenge relating to COVID, do we need to be more trained in mental health? I dealt with students who would come in and had serious mental health challenges, and I'm not necessarily trained as a psychologist or a therapist, for instance. To round this out, I now work at Top Hat, which is one of the fastest growing startups in Canada from the last 12 years. We're, I believe, almost 12 years old. This was started in Waterloo, software engineer by the name of Mike Silagadzis. And essentially what happened was Mike was sitting in class at Waterloo and saying, this is not engaging. I am totally distracted. I'm thinking about other things. I'm distracted by my own technology. And the professor up there is the sage on the stage, which is a term for saying they're just talking, and there's no two-way communication. There's no engagement or interactivity. So he decided to essentially build something that turned into a company that now has over 400 people and is right in the thick of the tech space in Toronto. So the challenges in higher education that we are working on as a company, we have a lot of schools. So over, I think, 1 or 2 million students use Top Hat, many in the States. So when we're working with schools in the United States, like I work with Tennessee State, Georgia, Michigan, they have a really poor graduation retention rate, some of these schools. Like some of the schools we work with, 50% of the students graduate. So the tuition is really high, but why are they not being successful? Why are they not graduating? Why are they not staying past first year? The poor ROI, return on investment. They're spending so much money. What are they getting out of it? The online learning experience now is a major challenge that we're working on. So our tech, our platform has now changed to help create a really dynamic online learning experience. And the slow integration of tech into the classroom. These are the challenges that we're working on right now. And the company mission is to maximize the return on investment for students when they're investing. So how we do that is by creating a classroom management software system that is very interactive. So professors can make presentations and it's like a classroom response system where there are questions throughout. There's a lot of data and analytics that the professor can take from how the students are performing so that they can be an agile teacher and change the way that they're teaching throughout. So there's a lot more to it, but essentially it is a tech platform that helps students and professors have fun and have an engaging lecture and classroom experience. The challenge for me in my role, the world of tech, some of you might be interested in getting into it. It is very competitive. It can be very cutthroat. There are a lot of great companies. I also have a lot of accounts. There are a lot of professors I have to look after, a lot of schools, a lot of people that need help. So it is challenging to keep up with that. It's a very fast changing landscape. You can think about how Top Hat is right in the thick of one of the biggest shifts in history of higher education with COVID, putting everything online. And it's challenging sometimes to engage professors and help them understand what their options are. It's sometimes challenging to get someone to take the time to speak with you and to understand that they actually can do something really powerful here and improve their course. So it's really important for me to meet them where they are. I can't just tell them all the great things that we're doing. I need to listen to the professor, understand what they're teaching and what their challenges and priorities are before I'm able to offer help as a consultant. So that puts a bow on it. I hope I didn't talk too long there, but I wanted to share what the challenges are for the different roles. And it's overall a very interesting time to be working in higher education. So I'll end it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Devin. That was an amazing presentation. Now we're just going to ask participants, if you want to ask any questions, you can raise your hand, or if you're not comfortable, you can also send a message through the chat and then we'll ask it for you anonymously.
And also, if you don't happen to have audio access and you can't unmute yourself, just put it in the general chat. I'm sure one of us will see it. So I'll start actually. Since the two of you have so much experience in the higher education field, my question to you is, in light of, I guess, your previous experience, like what's the biggest decision within your your work with higher education? What's your biggest regret, I guess, of something that you wish you could have done, or the way you wish you could have built something, like the final product that you built? Yeah.
I guess I can start. So one of the things I did in my last year of university is I did a research project on student salary expectations. And from that perspective, I was looking at a bunch of variables in terms of what can potentially affect how much money a student thinks that they'll make when they graduate. And we saw a lot of trends in there that were sort of consistent with what the things that we think of. So engineering graduates thought that they'd make more than liberal arts graduates, to name one. So with that paper, I think it was a pretty good paper. It was quite comprehensive, submitted it for a school assignment. And over the course of the next term, so my last term in the summer, I was going to work to get it published as a journal entry. So that sort of fell apart as school got busy and I wasn't as motivated to do it as I was before. So I think that paper could have brought a lot of value to the academic community, and I wish I could have done that. So I think that's the most immediate one. I think with other things, there's a lot of smaller things I would have done, but that's sort of the big thing that comes to mind.
Thank you.
So Sharon, the question was, what's like one regret from like something I've worked on?
Yeah. That you think would have really had an impact, yeah.
Okay. I'm not sure if I have too many like regrets from like anything that I worked on in recruitment or on the side business. I'll say two, maybe I can share two major, I guess we could say mistakes that I had in entrepreneurship, if that it sort of aligns. I don't know if I would regret it because these were decisions that me and my team made that we thought were the right decisions. But when you're starting a business, I would say the two biggest things for me that stood out. Number one, you have to have the right team and make sure that you have the right people involved, and you can't just pick people because they're your friends or because you like them. So I think from entrepreneurship, I wouldn't say it was necessarily a regret, but I don't think we had the right team in place to be successful long term. And the second, again, not a regret, but a mistake in entrepreneurship is making assumptions about what people need. So anytime you're selling something or creating a product, creating a service, and this goes for Top Hat as well, it's really dangerous to make assumptions that you think you know what people need and what the solution is. And so again, I wouldn't phrase that as regret, but I would say that that's a major mistake. If you're if you're just providing a solution without actually asking a lot of questions about who it is that you're speaking to or who you're trying to sell to.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
No problem.
I think someone's raising their hand.
Yeah.
Bloomy, feel free to go ahead and unmute them. You should be unmuted now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yep. Okay. Hi. Thanks for the great talk. So one of the questions I was having is how do you combat the difference between technology and incorporating technology into education? Just because the education has to be able to be accessible to so many different social classes, things like that. So how do you make sure that any technology that you're developing is accessible to even like low-income communities as well?
I can answer first. Was that Matri who asked that question?
Yep.
And I guess I can speak about that in context to Top Hat. So Top Hat is a for-profit business. It's not a not-for-profit. It's a competitive landscape. We have lots of costs. So we need to make money and drive revenue. So it is, I think that's a great question. How do you balance providing a great product and tech service, but take into consideration the cost? So we have sometimes when you, as a business, scalability is so important in tech. So if you have an entire department or an entire campus that is using Top Hat, that drives down the cost a lot. Top Hat is a subscription model service. It's a software as a service. It's a SaaS company. So the way that works is if a student uses Top Hat in one class, they can actually use it in any of their other classes for no additional charge. So those are some of the ways that we try to position ourselves as being accessible to lower income. Some schools do have cheaper deals as a result. So there's always negotiation as well. And ultimately, we try to reposition things. So this is a service that typically is $30 for one semester that students pay, but they might be paying $15,000 for the whole year tuition. So we like to say that for that slight, 0.5% increase in cost for that one class, we're able to give them a much better return on their overall investment in education. So I think it's a great question. There are some things where we're able to try to scale things out to reduce the cost for students, but also some of it has to do with repositioning. That an added cost doesn't necessarily mean a major barrier. We might actually be able to help someone get a better return on their investment in education as a whole.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
I guess from my perspective, so I can share a little bit more about what we did at Tech Under 20. So I guess one of the challenges in the high school and sometimes university space, but more so in the high school space, is that a lot of extracurriculars are pay to play, as people call them, and they can be quite expensive. So when I was in high school, going to debate tournaments was similar to playing a competitive sport. It cost a couple $1,000 a year to go to the big tournaments around Canada. So if you were doing things competitively, it costs a lot of money. Likewise, if you add up the costs of if you had any sort of training programs, whether they're for sports or education or music or whatnot, they cost a lot of money. So from the Tech Under 20 perspective, we had to balance the similar things. So one of the things we learned early is that if we didn't charge for events, nobody would take them seriously, which is really unfortunate. So for our first entrepreneurship competition, we sold out our tickets in 24 hours. So 100 tickets, but only 41 of those people attended, and a lot of them were poorly prepared. So what we realized is that we needed to charge for events just because people would feel more committed to what they're doing. And it also helped us diversify some of our revenue to make sure that sponsors and other channels didn't have too much influence. Last year, we made around 1/3 of the revenue from students in terms of the membership program and events. So when you make 1/3 of the money, it changes the dynamics from sponsors in terms of not being as reliant, and we can be more confident on sponsors are treated as partners. Like, we don't actually call them sponsors because we partner with them to bring a better student experience. Going back to the original point, so even though we charge for events, we try to make them accessible and make sure that if there's any challenges, we can offer alternatives. So for example, most of our events cost in the range of $20 to $30. And if you sign up early, they're quite cheap. Like, going to like a full day conference with some top industry speakers would cost like a couple $100 if it was a quote unquote adult conference. But for us, it cost $20 if you signed up right away. And that included food and all those goodies back before COVID days started. Likewise for our entrepreneurship competition. For a 3-month competition, you paid $30 as an early registrant, and you had access to some of the best mentors we've met, lots of opportunities to learn, great presentations and such. So from that perspective, we try to make it accessible from a financial perspective. And if that still is challenging, we ask students to do some volunteer help work for us, and they'd get a ticket in return. So I think it's a balance, but at the end of the day, you'll see that the students who are committing are the ones who care. And the other thing I want to mention is the question is, who's actually your target audience? So for us, it's been students. For a lot of organizations, it's parents, right? So when we talk to students about their commitment and asking to pay $20 for an event, a lot of people say, oh, it's not worth it, right? When on an absolute level, it's absolutely worth it, but they're not thinking from it from a perspective of how will this benefit my education, because that's something that my parents pay for. I get my allowance or my part-time job to pay for other goodies. So when you think about marketing and sort of targeting people for revenue, that's something to consider is if a parent is willing to pay $2,000, $20 is nothing. If you're a student willing to pay $10 for lunch, $20 is something. So also an important perspective to take when you're sort of thinking of solutions in target markets.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We have an anonymous question. So it's actually more specific to Dennis. So this person is asking, let me just pull up the question. So she's asking that getting a STEM degree, did you ever find your personal education lacking? I often find those in other faculties get the opportunity to learn about themselves, and she's found her STEM degree, but she's thinking that it's not really preparing her to be a person, just a mathematician.
So I think I'd start off with the whole idea of STEM. So I think it's gotten really, really popular recently, but the whole grouping is very different. So I think if you consider like even the field of science, right? In high school, you had a science class in like grade 9 and 10, but then it diverged, right? So taking classes in different faculties is quite different. So not sure which program you're in, but just in general, just looking at the STEM, focus on the S, the science. So I've had friends in biology at U of T, and some of their programs, they had classes with 2,000 people. On the other side of the spectrum, people in some physics classes had like 30 people, and they all became immediate friends. And the profs didn't really care about logistical things because these classes were so hard that if you wanted to be there, it didn't matter if you submitted the assignment 1 minute behind schedule, as opposed to the class with 2,000 people where you'd immediately have your grade dropped. So I think from that perspective, it's really different, and that's just something to consider. But regardless of that, in terms of, I guess, my computer science experience, I think that having a STEM or sort of science background is really interesting in terms of problem solving and the skills you learn. Sometimes they're like translatable to the workforce, sometimes they're not. Even if in something employable like computer science, right? It's a lot of the courses we take, they're not what industry wants, as I mentioned sort of in my introduction. But in terms of learning about yourself, I think that's where the important thing is of taking other classes. So I did a HR minor university. I took some psychology classes. I read a lot in terms of different fields. My involvement with Tech Under 20, I tried to build out my network, my leadership skills, my marketing and sales skills. So I think all those things are super important. I find history interesting. So I would say that education is only part of your experience. And I actually wrote a blog post about this, that if you have a certain goal in mind, you sort of get those different bits and pieces to mix and match to say, okay, I might do a computer science degree and then I'll learn these things on the side. And for a moment in high school, I was actually considering that, of doing a business degree and just coding on the side. But at the end of the day, I sort of flipped my options and said, academically focus on computer science, on the side focus on the business side of things. So don't forget that school is only part of your education and your learning, just as what happens when you join the workforce. Like, I still have to do a lot of sort of studying on the side, both because I want to and sometimes because I need to. Like, technology changes so quickly that you have to have a healthy consumption of the new technologies coming out, as well as sort of doing other things like being involved in the community, giving back, and all those things. So there's lots of ways to learn, and I think conferences like this and communities are really great on working with people and learning about different things and perspectives. And don't be afraid to just follow your interests on the internet. There's basically everything on there. So yeah, don't treat school as your only means of learning.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We have another question from Hirsch, so I'm just going to unmute him.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Perfect. So I just had a question regarding like learning online via technology. So my question is, like, do you think that we'll be able to fully shift learning to online via technology? Like, you know, due to COVID-19, a lot of schools are like made their semesters and fall online, and like, I don't know, personally, I'm a first year incoming student at Waterloo, so like, I don't know how that's going to play out. But do you think it's going to be as efficient as learning in person? And do you think we'll be able to fully shift learning online for some departments or some programs of learning?
I think that's an awesome question, Harsh. So I can touch on that and share some thoughts. So you're going into first year at Waterloo?
Yeah.
And what program?
Computer science.
Computer science. Awesome. Yeah. So, I mean, your question is exactly what Top Hat is right in the middle of, right? And so there's a lot of competitors to Top Hat as well. So there's a lot of companies like Top Hat that, to answer your question, would say, yes, absolutely. Absolutely, we can create a learning environment that's dynamic, engaging, interactive, and make it as good as possible for the student and the professor. So there's a lot of ways where, for instance, Top Hat, it's branded as one platform where you can have all your lectures in there. You just go to one place and it's like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and your course all in one. What it requires, though, I think, are people to like accept and do the best that they can with it. I think there are tools out there, whether it's Top Hat or another platform or a learning management system, that absolutely can create a dynamic online learning environment. Absolutely. Like, you can learn many subjects online, but what's really important is the tools are there, but how are you using them? Are you using them to understand where your students are at? Are you taking a pulse of where they're at? Are you making it engaging? Are you looking at the research of what are different effective ways to teach online? Or are you just using a tool and saying, well, this is what we're using and I'm kind of winging it? So to answer your question, yes, it is possible, but it requires people to use tools the right way, to seek support, and to kind of have everyone commit to, like, this is the way we're going about it. With that said, I'm also, like, even though I work in tech, I like to think I'm an analog guy as well. Like, I personally really value the in-person, human experience of education, which obviously is challenging to replicate. You can't replicate that perfectly. And then there are some subjects that are going to be really hard, right? Where if you are hands-on and you need to be in the lab for specific testing or whatever it is that you need to do in engineering or science, or you need to be out in the fields in environmental science, that is going to be challenging as well. But for the most part, I would say yes, but there are still many challenges to it.
Perfect.
I guess to add on to that answer, I would say that it's it requires a change in how events in education are run. So for example, this year we hosted for Tech Under 20, and I can talk about some RBC events as well, but for Tech Under 20, we do things more quickly than a big bank. So so we had our student hiring event and we did it online. And basically the concept was, first day you learn about different things. Second day you're put in front of employers and you do speed pitching for landing a summer job. So the difference this year was that people were on an online room and pitching to each other sort of in one-on-one video scenarios. So that wasn't too different than being in person. Though it was certainly more exhausting just because you had to stare at a screen the whole day and it was a lot more rapid fire. So I think that event translated online like 95%. Other events that we're thinking of hosting this year is like the leadership team is asking, how do we host an engaging conference online? How do you replicate the experience of walking into a room, overhearing somebody talking about something you're interested in and walking over and saying hello? Right, so that's something that can't really be directly translated, so you have to think of workarounds. The other thing is just being burnt out from using technology. Like maybe I'm just getting old, even though I'm not that old, but after working at a computer for 8 hours a day, which is a little bit different than what was happening before, because I do maybe 4 hours of coding and then like 4 hours of meetings, or like 2 hours of meetings and 2 hours being at a whiteboard talking with colleagues about stuff. Like my eyes and like general body don't feel as great as they would at the office, just because like you're always focusing on something. Sometimes you have to be like, you have worse posture, you're not standing as much. So even maintaining that. And when somebody says, let's get on a video call, I'm like, I really don't want to. Or somebody's like, read this article. And I'm like, I can't, like, I don't want to look at a screen anymore. So I think for me personally, like I can only really focus either when I'm solving a complicated problem on a computer, or if I just have like a textbook in front of me with some notes. So I certainly think there's going to be adjustment. I don't think it's going to be the same. I think that even doing group work together online, it's quite different. I know that people, even a couple of years younger than me, have grown up in a different environment. For context, Tech Under 20 has always been run sort of for the past 5 years on Discord as a remote community, working together that way. And there's certainly been challenges. Like a year into things, people would hear somebody's voice and be like, sorry, what's your name, right? So certainly differences in education. You can't say hello to the person beside you. Study groups aren't the same. You can't walk over to somebody who's solving an interesting problem on a whiteboard or blackboard and join in. So it'll be tough. Like I don't know how it's sustainable for the next couple of years, but there'll probably need to be some sort of like localized grouping where even if you're not learning in a university, you still have friends within your community. So if you grew up, I don't know, in Scarborough, maybe there's 4 people from your programs that you can get together and sort of from a distance or in a sort of small group, you can learn together, right? You can do homework together, you can talk and make friends that way. And that certainly makes it harder for people living in more remote communities, but like, I can't imagine doing a 4-year degree staring at a computer and that's the only way to learn. So everybody's different, but there's a lot of challenges ahead in this aspect.
Thank you. So at this time, we are going to close the questions that we'll be taking because we already have 3 to 4 more and we don't want to run too much over time. So the first anonymous question that I'll be going through is during the 2 of you, your time working in education, what major shifts have you noticed in the kinds of problems that are being faced by consumers, and what do you believe will be the biggest issue faced in education 10 years in the future?
That's a big question.
Yeah,
10 year and what was it? What was the other one, Sharon?
Just kind of major shifts and trends that you've seen within education.
So I'll quickly jump in here. I was going to type in the chat, like preach all caps to a lot of things that Dennis was saying there. And then it's just, you had a great answer there with some of the challenges and workarounds with tech. Building on that, and Dennis, you're saying, I don't know how sustainable this is for the next couple of years. I work for a company that is saying yes to that question of Harsh. Like when Harsh asked, can we replicate the experience online? I work for a company that would say yes, but I 100% agree with Dennis and see the workarounds. I see the major shifts in the next 10 years. We're going to see how long this lasts, obviously with COVID, but I don't know if education is going to go back to what we've always known it to be. I'm so curious to see what it's going to be like in the next 10 years. I think online learning is going to go through the roof. And because of that, it's going to really cause people to question how much they want to spend on their education. So I think it's going to be a huge shift in like, why is tuition the way it is? How many people don't even care about living on campus or the residence experience? Not everybody wants that. So if they can have solutions that are much cheaper, where they can learn online from wherever they are, this is changing the gig economy as well, working from home, work-life balance, lifestyle, all of that is going to have an effect. So in the next 10 years, I think the shifts we're going to see more online. And I think universities, which are traditionally kind of, as Dennis was saying, with the big banks, they're like these massive ocean liners that it takes a lot of energy for them to shift even 1 degree in a different direction. But you might see different degree structures, online offerings, and they're going to have to find other ways to provide a good student experience. Also, another shift that's already happened is a lot of this bit learning. So you may be aware of like Khan Academy, Coursera, BrainStation in Toronto that has other locations. A lot of these places that are focusing on skill development and are you future proof and upskilling. And Dennis made some amazing points about like school is only part of your education. You know, don't treat it as your only way to learn. A lot, like I see that in the next 10 years of it's already started. And so I'm really curious to see if people won't necessarily all go towards the like, oh, I'm just going to do the 4-year degree. They might do a 2-year degree or 2+2, or like, I'm going to do this and then I'm going to get a certificate in data analytics and a certificate here and online at Lighthouse Labs for software development. So I think those are going to be some of the major shifts in the next 10 years that have already started.
I guess from my perspective, I think that there's a lot of things to examine, right? So the first one is, how are universities structured? I think this is something that a lot of people don't do a lot of research into. They go into things like based on reputation, prestige, or whatnot. So in general, I think people will be asking harder questions, and rightfully they should be. When people talk about, is this university better than this university? And that's a generic question, and people get like rather emotional about that because they have great memories from places, or they have really bad memories. So when somebody asks, is this first year course better at U of T or Waterloo, as sort of a rival's question, right? And the only answer is, can you look at the professors? Can you look at the course material? Can you look at the people there? Can you look at the sort of structure that exists? If somebody can't answer that question, they didn't do enough research. And the reason I bring this up is that universities have been changing over time as they've become more social institutions. So this is more prevalent in the States, but the question is, why does a university need to build a gym where people can like lick food off the floor? And at the same time, some classrooms are falling apart, right? And the reason behind that, especially in the States, is that you earn a lot of money from the NCAA, right? You earn millions of dollars. Your sports coach is the highest paid person there. And in Canada, the dynamics are slightly different, but the number of administrators and people working at the university who aren't professors or assistant professors has been going up significantly. I think the number I read was in the 80s. The ratio between people in the university to students was 1 to 7, and now it's 1 to 3. So the question is, why do we need more bureaucracy in universities? And it's not to say these people are always doing unuseful things. Like if the number of people working were like mental health support workers or additional staff, that would be great. But what we're seeing is that you have people who necessarily don't have a specific role that makes your education better. So I think that's one of the challenges, is that when you move away and saying, do I need to pay $50,000 in the case of the States or $15,000 in the case of Canada to be in this top program? The answer is probably going to be no. So that's going to put more pressure on universities to change. The other thing I wanted to mention is that you have all the power to change how education works. So as an example, going back to Tech Under 20s, sorry to beat the dead horse, but a lot of my experience comes from that. So from there, you say in 2016, hackathons were starting to rise. They're not sort of as common as they are now. Like in high school, when I was in high school, hackathons weren't really a thing, especially sort of in the GTA. They might have been in parts of the States. But at this point, everybody goes to hackathons. Every university recruits from hackathons. It's hackathons, hackathons, hackathons. And if you're not in the tech space, just look up what a hackathon is. You basically get together and build something cool with someone. So in 2016, Tech Under 20 were like, hey, hackathons aren't long-term projects. They don't bring together different groups of people. They don't encourage sort of community engagement. So let's create a different competition for it, right? So then we created the Tech Under 20 Cup. So with that perspective, like, you can change how education works. I think that's the whole purpose of this conference, is to think about that. But think about how education is changing. Fight for recognition for what you do. I think one of the biggest challenges with sort of the micro-credentials and all those things is that it's still hard to justify to institutions that you're doing a good job. And even though you might not have 5 years of experience, this is how your work aligns with that. So in your current position, fight for sort of showing that what you've done, whether it's side projects or being at conferences, is worth the experience that you feel it is. And as you get older, never forget that, right? I think one of the saddest things that I see is that when people talk about some kind of things they think are unfair, whether it's injustice from a social perspective or just sort of how systems are broken from an education or employment perspective, and you see those people 5 years later, and suddenly they're complacent because they're now in a situation that they're benefiting in. So don't forget that as you get older, continue to feel sort of I don't want to call it pain, but remember the struggles that you had, remember the things that discouraged you, and try to change those systems as you grow older and sort of gain more experience and influence. I think that's one of the biggest things that I learn, and some of the biggest things I try not to forget is that the frustration that me or some of my friends felt, or other people that I knew, when people doubted them and doubted their capabilities, whether it was because of their age or any other factors, gender, race, socioeconomic background. So don't forget the challenges that you face, and you can certainly make a difference.
Thanks, Dennis. So if the both of you are free, do you guys mind extending this to around 11:15, 11:20?
Yep.
Yeah, is that cool with the both of you? Perfect. We just have 3 more questions. Andrea, I'm gonna unmute you, so go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
So thanks for sharing. And my question is, I think nowadays a lot of students, including myself, are confused about what we want to do. So in your teaching experience, how did you approach and help students figure out what they want to do in future?
Devin or Dennis, whoever. Dennis, feel free to go first.
Sure. So I think the whole mentality I have, and I encourage other people to do, is just try things out, right? Go to different events, try things out, read. That's the only way to immerse yourself into all these different things. I guess the whole mandate of what we did at Tech Under 20 was just expose people to a bunch of different things, right? Expose people to speakers, expose people to events, projects, and do it with friends, right? It should be fun. When you're trying to figure out if you want to do business or technology or anything else, all those things have so many different subfields. The only way you can learn is by talking to people in the industry, to trying out projects yourself. Like, if you're interested in doing biology, let's say in school, email a professor, or email 10 professors. One of them will get back to you, or email a graduate student and ask them, like, what is a biology master's, what's a career in biology? If you're interested in being a software engineer, message a software engineer. Somebody who's more experienced, somebody who's more recently a new grad, you'll get different perspectives. If you're interested in physics, like same thing, math, whatever it is, just reach out to people and then work on projects, get perspective, build something interesting, do experiments, whatever it might be, do readings, do research, write articles. Until you actually do stuff, you'll be stuck in sort of this perspective that I don't know what to do. And the answer is, yes, the world is overwhelming, but the only way to get out of it is to take one small step at a time. And that's where structure and social support is so important. Find peers, whether it's people at this conference or other places, and just be like, hey, we're going to learn how to do this thing together. We're going to keep each other accountable, not to slack off and just watch Netflix. And slowly and surely, we'll figure this out together.
Thank you. Perfect.
Yeah,
fine.
Yeah, that was awesome, Dennis. I will build off that. I think trying things out, absolutely, I agree with that. When I was a career counselor at Western, most students I talked to did not know what they wanted to do in the future. And the vast majority of high school students that I used to work with also don't know what they want to do in the future. Even a lot of my peers in their 20s. So that question, Andrea, is one that like almost everyone is asking. So one of the ways that I would encourage students to begin to find that out and find their own answer to that question is similar to what Dennis was saying. I used to use a lot of like design thinking principles, and one of them is like one of the steps of design thinking is like ideation. So you're starting to think about ideas. So it's actually in career counseling, it's not a good practice to start with, well, what's your passion, Andrea? Let's start there. Because most of us have many passions. So it's actually not a great place to start. It's more thinking about general interests and start to create ideas for that. And then, as Dennis was saying, like go out and get some data and something, ask some really thoughtful questions, and
Am I the only one that's dealing with a little bit of lag on Devin's end?
He's breaking up for me as well.
Boom,
Yeah, he's breaking up. I can't hear him. Did you message Devin?
I'm trying to, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, there he goes.
Okay. I guess.
In the meantime, we'll just move on to the next question while we wait for Devin to come back, just because we are running a little bit out of time. Azmat, go ahead, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you for that. And my question was kind of directed to Devin, but I'm sure Dennis could offer some insights too. So earlier it was mentioned that students are not getting the enough return on their investment that they're making within their for their university education, and specifically pertaining to career counseling and career readiness. How do you think that paradigm shift can happen, that instead of procuring these services to the private sector, educational institutions like universities can actually prepare students by themselves? Because if these services are procured to the private sector and other startups and companies out there, that raises a major challenge regarding equity of access to the opportunity and these students' socioeconomic status. So if you could speak to that even if that shift in the paradigm is even possible, that universities by themselves can kind of offer those services and get the students ready for what's facing them in the world after they graduate.
Yeah, I guess I can talk about this. So A long time ago, when universities were first created, they're sort of very theoretical as like places just to exchange knowledge, right? And they were not accessible to most people. There's only a couple sort of stories of poor people or marginalized people actually getting access to universities in a lot of places. One of them is actually about Michael Faraday, about how he was basically a very poor young boy and he got rescued because people thought he was bright, and then he invented a bunch of things. So in the past, universities were not accessible. They were not meant to be practical. They're basically just people thinking about random things and encouraging that behavior. What we've seen recently is a lot of sort of technical schools, or colleges as we would call them, became universities because they were more lucrative. So if you're going to a pragmatic program before you typically go to a college, and that would offer no sort of social or less social discrimination than it does now, right? At this point, there's a pressure for everybody to go to university as the place of learning and the place of opportunities. And people forget that, is that when before, like if 20% of people went to university, I think 20 years ago or 30 years ago, right now it's over 50%, right? The question is that the right fit for everybody? If you're looking for like a pure career that's going to be successful from a money perspective and from something that's interesting to do, like doing skilled trades is probably best for like 90% of people, if not more, right? Like being able to learn how to build something physically, something that's in demand, you'll get an apprenticeship or whatnot, and then you can start like a contracting business later on if you want to go into the entrepreneurship space. Like amazing career path. Why don't people do it? Well, people might not be exposed to those skills, and there's a certain social stigma, especially in certain well-educated groups of people, that this is something that's above them, which is really unfortunate. So that sort of gives you a perspective, I guess, or starts your research on why universities aren't practical, is that they were never meant to be practical. They're places that were supposed to be hidden away from society, where people can research abstract stuff. Like one of my friends is researching like abstract physics, right? You talk about theoretical physics. There is no practical impact on the world right now with a paper that he could publish. If you go into things like computer science wasn't really a field until the 80s. It was sort of the intersection of electrical engineering and math, right? It wasn't intended to pump out an industry full of programmers. So it's not taught in that way. So in terms of universities moving in that direction, I think they slowly are, especially with their partial programs. Like a lot of schools offer sort of continuing education, things that are a lot more practical. Like U of T, the computer science program doesn't offer a cloud course, but it does offer it as a continuing education course. So from that perspective, I think universities are moving to that direction, but it's all about the target market. If they can get you to show up to a job without, or to university without promising a full-time job, like why would they do that? It costs more money, it costs more effort. Even from Waterloo's perspective, they have the best co-op program in the country and maybe in the world, right? But there's a lot of things that happen with that, where when you have a monopoly, you stop being as engaged, right? Most of their co-op services are outsourced. They don't do it in-house. Their company connections are sort of, they're more legacy based, and from that it's sort of just been a snowball effect. There hasn't been a pressure to innovate on how co-op programs are being run. So at the end of the day, it's market forces, and hopefully COVID helps with that, and that people are hired to be more iterative and innovative rather than sort of sticking to we're a unique marketplace for you to meet employers. That's what we offer. We're not going to teach you on the job skills because we don't have to.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you, Dennis. Really appreciate that. Devin, I understand your connection is kind of wonky, but we're just going to get to our last question, and then we'll close this session. So, Andre, I'm going to unmute you now, okay?
Okay, so my question is, with Zoom initially not being founded to replace everything about in-person lectures and seminars at universities, would you say we should start developing more interactive platforms taking into account different cognitive principles in neuroscience and actual science of learning to have the best experience of remote higher ed on new platforms like this fall, and not necessarily using Zoom, which seems to be the only popular or like accessible option for universities as of now. And Dennis, do you have any other things in mind that would help with such platforms having some psychology background?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that video conferencing is sort of a stopgap, I think. I think there's been a lot of cool technology in the past that people haven't sort of fully adopted for a number of reasons. Like there's been a number of tools, even like from 10 years ago, that sort of simulated a virtual office, at least in the corporate space, where you would walk in, you'd move to room, you could talk to people that way, you could sort of hear people in that way. So I think spaces have existed. It's just the question of how do people adopt them? How good is the sales team, right? It's not always about technology and learning. The other thing I think is that once VR becomes more accessible, that could definitely be a better way to interact with people. The problem is that there's a lot of cost to adoption. The technology isn't fully mature yet. Like if you could simulate being in a university and you can have the same sound quality where you walk into a room and you can hear murmurs over here about this thing and then something over here about something else. Like I think that would be a platform that would simulate real life much more easily and sort of enhance your learning capabilities. In terms of developing new platforms and I guess engaging, like even the structure of things, right? If you go to a lot of innovative tutoring places or student run events or conferences or whatnot, the learning there is better than in schools often. One of the ways I think that it's best to learn is basically to, in the case of, let's say, university, is that you have a professor and you have some TAs and then you just work on a project the whole year and you have people to consult you and help you out with things. But that requires a shift in mindset and responsibility where students have to recognize that they drive their own learning and they just have these resources and coaching along the way. But otherwise, they just build stuff and get feedback and sort of it's useful in that way. So I think that it's a change, and a lot of things are just legacy infrastructure. Like if you have a bunch of lecture halls, that's not conducive to that kind of learning. You need like smaller breakout rooms. And if you've hired a bunch of these tenured professors to do research, it's not as conducive for them to sort of coach people along the way when things aren't directly related to the research. So it has to do with infrastructure as well. But as we sort of move away from that into a digital space, especially because of COVID, hopefully people will think about how this education starts. And we've seen a lot of like boot camps and stuff spring up, but we've yet to sort of hit sort of a replacement model. If you're curious about certain university replacement programs, there's a bunch of coding and sort of data science programs where you pay nothing when you enter, and then you only sort of pay them when you get a job. So there's been a number of programs like that. I forget the exact name. I'll just post it into the chat after a quick Google search, but it's an interesting space for sure.
Perfect, thank you. Devin, if you have any to add.
Yeah, I'll add some closing thoughts. Sorry that my internet kind of cut out there when I was answering the last question there. Great question here. I would say first, look at what already exists. There are so many platforms that are already out there right now. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of competition in the space. Top Hat, for instance, has been like growing like crazy. They're hiring so many software developers, so many people in sales. The number of new features and iterations that Top Hat has created just in the last year is like ridiculous at the speed of how much it's changed. And that's one company in the space. So there's so many other companies that are similar to Top Hat. So I think if the question is, what are the new platforms that we should build? I don't know if the answer should be yes, we need to build a new platform, because likely you're going to start hitting on some of the things that are already created out there. I would think about how are we going to change certain platforms that exist, or delivery models, or the person who asked this question you were already heading down a pretty good road, I think, where you were thinking about neuroscience and like put the platform aside for a second. Is this the best way that we should be teaching people? I've spoken to people in neuroscience when I used to be at Western, and they said a lot of things about how the way we teach and test is not the best way. So I think if you start there, you focus more on the problem, hone in on the problems first. The platform that you design might be the solution. Don't start with the solution, start more with the problem, because there are already so many solutions that exist. And once you better understand the problem, then you might be able to bring something to a platform that already exists and make it better. That's what I would say.
Alrighty. So first off, thank you to all of our participants again for attending. This will more or less conclude our first guest panel. We'd also like to thank Dennis and Devin again for giving up, your personal time on a weekend to get involved with our conference and provide such like an interesting perspective on both the case and the issue of sustainable education as a whole. The two of them are also available for coffee chats. So do check your email for the links to sign up for those after the conference. Our first workshop will actually be held in 10 minutes at 11:30 with Dr. Prasa Gopi Ramanan. And our next guest panel will be taking place at 1:30 with Miss Stephanie, Professor Nig, as well as Miss Gabriella, all of which is already included in your Compass package. The Zoom links for those are also, they should be in your email. Please shoot us an email or a message if you don't see them. But yeah, we hope to see you guys soon, and thank you again so much for coming out. All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you guys. Bye.
Everyone,
Having us.
take care.